director, chairman of the centre, which has back problems. So Margaret, I'm going to ask you to take the floor first. Margaret is, as you'll remember her from the Religion, Science and Environment Symposium, a master of skill and elegance and learning all combined, with incredible optimism, which has meant that she's been getting with family problems this weekend and still managing to be here to lead us into discussion. The books. Margaret, the books.
Thank you. Almost exactly 6 years ago, those photographs that we've just had mentioned, I was told that some small books had been found in a cave in Jordan. They were made of lead and were covered with Jewish symbols. Was I interested? I most certainly was. David Elkington then sent me a huge number of photos, and I began to examine them. The first batch was pictures of small metal books or of pages from books. Most were made of lead, bound with rings. Some were, or had been, bound on all four sides. They were sealed. What immediately came to mind was the little sealed book that is the theme in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. St. John describes a vision of Jesus in heaven, and Jesus opens a small sealed book. The little books were covered with letters and images. Most of the letters seemed to be forms of the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, but there were also letters from other scripts. The letters are not inscribed, but are raised above the surface. This means that the individual pages were cast, and in the process of making the molds, some of the letters had been written backwards and even upside down. Most of the letters are written without spaces to mark individual words. Most of the images are linked to the Jerusalem temple and to the autumn festival of tabernacles, Sukkot. There are rows of citron fruits, for example, and leafy branches, both used at Sukkot. Some images are similar to those found on coins in the late Second Temple period, about 100 years before and after the time of Jesus. Examples of these would be the fruiting palm tree and the pomegranate. Other images, however, have not been found elsewhere in the form that appears on the lead books. For example, the shallow seven-branched lampstand, the menorah, set above the crossed willow branches and by the side of a fruiting almond branch. This particular collection of images is all linked to claims to the true temple priesthood. There are also human faces, some with rays of light, as though it is the face of the sun, and there are rows of diagonal crosses. There are 8-pointed stars and curious patterns of dots. Examining the artifacts as someone whose special interest is in the origins of Christianity, I could immediately set them in that context. The roots of Christianity lay in the traditions and practices of the Jerusalem temple. Jesus was said to be the true high priest. The face of Jesus is described in the book of Revelation as shining like the sun, and the diagonal crosses that appear all over the books were the sign of the high priesthood and also an early Christian symbol. The Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, was also associated with the coming of the Messiah. My colleague Dr. Samuel Zinner, however, who has a special interest in Jewish art, doesn't see the need for suggesting a Christian context, and he has found links to the Jewish war against Rome in 132 to 135. links to the mosaic pattern of early synagogue floors, and to the direct decoration of Torah shrines. He has already completed some remarkable work in deciphering some of the script and identifying some symbols. At the beginning of a research program, this is how things should be. Scholars do not agree, but identify what is familiar to them, bearing in mind the other possibilities. There should be no predetermined idea of what we shall find, of what we shall allow as evidence, of what facts are more important than others. Scholars learn from each other. We cannot use the term authentic until we have some idea of what the little books are. Nor can we use the word forgery until we have an idea of what they might be forgeries of. At the moment, we have nothing with which to compare them. It is possible that some items may have been copied from earlier exemplars, but that only puts the question further back. Where did these images and scripts originate? We can then try to find out how they were used. It is possible that their most recent use has been as amulets, but they might not have been created as amulets. Everything depends on the age of the various items. Since we have not had access to the artifacts themselves, my colleague Matthew Hood has had to work from greatly enlarged photographs. The photographs I first saw 6 years ago. He has examined the state of the metal and drawn some tentative conclusions as to when various items were made. The artifacts were found, we are told, in a cave in the northwest of the Kingdom of Jordan. This may be significant, since there were early Christian communities in that region, but there have been countless other communities since. Other items were found with the books, for example, a bowl, a platter, and some small figurines. The face on the figurines seems to be the face on the books, so there is much to investigate. When I first looked at the pictures of the little books, I could never have imagined what problems lay ahead, such that today, 6 years later, we are only just able to announce the establishing of a centre to study these finds.
Margaret, thank you very much. As this is in a sense the central presentation, do you have any questions to Margaret? She said no. Specific questions.
So Margaret, you talked about the temple traditions. Could you say a bit more about, because I know a lot of your work is about the Second Temple.
Yes.
Could you talk about the relevance of these books to that and the emblems thereon?
Well, the emblems on, or the little signs and symbols on the books are temple symbols, that is no doubt at all. You can't really distinguish between the symbols of the first temple and the second temple, except insofar as certain symbols were only in the first temple and not in the second temple. Now these would be things like the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Covenant hasn't yet been identified on the books. So, I mean, if we do find an Ark of the Covenant, then this would be, you know, a real ace to find. So there are problems with that, but the symbols that we find on the books are not just general temple symbols. They are all to do with the Feast of Sukkot and with the messianic expectations that went with that feast. There's a very particular set of symbols on the photographs of the items that I have seen so far. There may be a completely different set of information on things I haven't yet seen. You know, the unknown unknowns. Okay.
So is there a possibility that the messianic expectations of the Jews might have translated further on in time as emblems that were also those of an early Christian community?
perfectly possible. This is why it is so important to get some sort of date within which, some sort of window, historical window, within which these things were actually made. And when we've got that, we limit the area within which the Hebraists have to look for a possible context, and indeed what they might have been used for. But at the moment, all we can do is try to make sense of the letters. The combinations of pictures are very interesting. Why is that with that? Things like that, because that also speaks volumes. And indeed, why there are pictures with Hebrew writing, which is in itself very interesting.
And is the context of their finding to do with books? Because I gather they were found in tombs and other places. So
well, we know where we have been told it.
Yes.
But there have been all sorts of stories, some of which are rather flaky. But there is a cave that does seem to be linked with the place where the books were. But we've been told so many stories, it's really very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Here's what we're doing today. We're setting up a mechanism for
Yeah.
evaluation. We had hoped to be joined by colleagues from Jordan. They've had visa problems.
Sorry, could you speak up?
Sorry,
That's quite-
we're hoping to be joined by colleagues from Jordan, from Yarmouth University. And they have visa problems, so we've arranged a second meeting, which will be in late May, when we can hear from them, and when we can ask them all back, and we can then see what the Jordanians have to say. So this is very much an Anglo-Jordanian, a global Anglo-Jordanian exercise. Let's turn now to Jennifer to talk about the experience of discovering these pictures, and just briefly about the delay. As someone who's interested in public affairs and teaches practice, there's a sort of insight here about the use and abuse of the internet to inhibit stories which you don't like. And that's a new development. It's one that interests me technically. But Jennifer, the floor is yours. Jennifer tells me she hasn't spoken in public since she was 15. We're just talking to friends. Jennifer.
David and I are very honoured and privileged to be here today in the presence of such esteemed company. We would like to thank everyone who has helped to make today possible. We are very grateful for your dedication and support. We wish to extend a special thank you to Dr. Margaret Barker. Without your guiding wisdom, extraordinary support, and friendship, we would not be here today. David and I first came across the codices quite by chance during a visit with an acquaintance of ours who had received a set of images from Israel and was curious as to what they were. When we first laid eyes on the set of images in 2007, our initial reaction was one of fascination, but also of skepticism. Were they genuinely antique, or were they forgeries? If they are forgeries, what exactly are they forgeries of? We then set about having the metal expertly analyzed and dated. Initial spectrographic tests from independent laboratories confirmed that they are compatible with Roman lead from the first few centuries. So we ask ourselves, who would have made these lead books, and why? Due to the curious religious symbolism on the codices, we got in contact with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams. He recommended that we get in touch with Dr. Margaret Barker, who would know exactly what to do. In April 2009, we accepted an invitation to Israel to view and get high-definition photographs of the collection of artifacts, with the express purpose of being able to study them on a linguistic and scientific level, to establish their provenance and manufacture. The visit also revealed the fact that they had actually been discovered in the caves in the Kingdom of Jordan. Acting on professional advice, we traveled to Jordan to ascertain that the appropriate authorities were aware of this important discovery. Together with the Jordanian military intelligence, we located the actual cave site itself. Over the course of the next 3 years, together with a small group of experts, led by Dr. Barker and Professor Philip Davies, we continued to study and test the codices, whilst at the same time campaigning for their repatriation to Jordan. Our announcement of the discovery several years ago stimulated a great deal of academic debate. including varying contributions by several Oxford scholars, notably the classicist Dr. Peter Toneman of Wadham College, whose denunciation was published in the Times Literary Supplement. He stated that he would, I quote, stake his academic reputation that not one of the codices was authentic, end quote. We appreciate his contribution and look forward to viewing the detailed analysis conducted by him and his colleagues, which led to his confident conclusions. Dr. Toneman's assessment prompted much ardent internet debate with a group of mostly American academics who refer to themselves as bibliobloggers. Some of these scholars hold senior positions in top British universities. Not all the debate was academic in nature. There have been unfounded statements made that have been offensive to the people of Jordan, causing undue delay to the collective effort of scholars and dignitaries both in Jordan and in the UK, who had been working towards safeguarding and repatriating the collection for further study. We wondered what it was about the codices that upset them so much so that they took the time to send out a high volume of correspondence, not only to Jordanian authorities, but university heads, publishers, media channels, and religious institutions in Jordan, America, Britain, and Europe, with which to oppose their views. This action has not only caused considerable delay to scholarly investigation of the codices, but the subsequent destruction and closure of one of the most important archaeological sites in the Middle East. A large amount of careful work was being undertaken at the time, which at the request of the authorities in Jordan had not been made public. Sadly, we have been informed that many of the codices have already been sold on the black market. Questions still remain. What are these artifacts? What do they mean? Who created them, and for what purpose? We will continue to seek the answers and invite all interested parties to join us in uncovering this mystery. Thank you. And now I have a special treat for everybody. We've actually brought one along with us, which we'll pass around for everybody to look at.
Special message. Thank you very much. I had the misfortune of actually leaving this in an Oxford hotel, and by virtue of the fact that it was in a cheap jiffy bag, it was left completely untouched, and when I found it a couple of hours later, pass it along. Well, that will pass us round then, so thank you, Nicola. You have a future in public speaking. Can we now ask Margaret to come back? The key to our work in the centre is to devise a evaluation panel that in its membership and its working methods cannot be challenged. There's never going to be earthly world an absolute answer. We believe we can get very close. So we considerable thought into the nature of the panel. Margaret has assembled experts from the area. Isolating the funding of the panel from the funding for the rest of the centre, and absolutely want to make sure that as we move forward over the coming months, no one can challenge our process. So Margaret will come back not as an enthusiast about the books, but as the stern academic overseer of our programs and of our
Sure by now you can see a little bit of our problem. Our first task must be to establish the date of the individual artifacts, and there are probably several dates. My colleague Matthew has done some remarkable work using only the photographs, but we really do need access to the artifacts themselves to carry out comprehensive tests. So far, this has not been possible, but we hope that the first money raised to support the centre will be used for such testing. When we have an idea of their age, if only their approximate age, we can begin serious work to establish what they are. The Hebrew words we translate and the symbols we identify have to be set within a context consistent with their age. Then we have to check the various accounts we have been given as to where they were found and how. There is the thorny problem of provenanced and unprovenanced finds. How can we be certain that the artefacts were found where we have been told? Then there is the question of who should work on the finds. I should like the work of the Centre to involve as many scholars as possible, bearing in mind that many scholars are outside the walls of academia. I should also like this to be a cooperative venture without the rivalry and unpleasantness that bedevils so much scholarship at the moment. The closed shop methods that characterised research on the Dead Sea Scrolls was a scandal that no one wants to see repeated. I suggest that we work on the artefacts a few at a time, first establishing for each an approximate age, and then publishing on a website detailed images and inviting suggestions from anyone competent to work in the area. We would receive these suggestions by emails to the evaluation panel, who would meet, say, every 6 months to examine progress, report on what has been suggested, and make a preliminary report on each item. This will take a long time. We do not expect revelations within a few weeks. I suggest we do not have an open discussion forum, as this can lead to abusive exchanges. Only real name emails will be considered by the panel, real names that can be verified, and all contributions that are included in our final assessment will be credited to their originators. Real scholarship is a slow process. There can be no instant announcements. Remember, it has taken 50 years to publish all material known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and only now, after almost 70 years, actually 68 years, are scholars beginning to discuss the implications of what has been done. Our campaign to investigate the Jordanian lead books has suffered from hazards not endured by earlier generations of scholars. The hostile bloggers and the media whom they have influenced have been the major cause of delay in this investigation, and given the political situation in the area where the lead books were found, may have caused irreparable damage to the books and the site where we think they were found. Only time will tell. The Centre for the Study of the Jordanian Lead Books hopes to discover what they are.
Margaret, thank you. Could you just take us through the names you've got on the initial panel?
The initial panel, we have the chair was going to be Professor Robert Haywood. Thank you, because I've got a head like a sieve for things like this. The chair will be Professor Robert Haywood, who is Professor of Hebrew in the University of Durham, great Aramaic scholar, and a lovely person. Professor Philip Davies, a pioneering Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, and currently the chair of the Palestine Exploration Fund. Professor Bernhard Lang, who has just retired from the chair of Old Testament in the University of Paderborn, a great Hebrew scholar. Professor Yuri Stoyanov, who was formerly director of the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. And then Dr. Samuel Zinner, our Jewish colleague. Professor Ziad Al-Sad, who is one of our Jordanian colleagues, Matthew, of course. And these people will come together to look at the metal, first of all, and then to exchange ideas among ourselves as to the significance of the Hebrew and the other bits, because it's not all Hebrew what we've got on the codices, the other bits that are there, and the imagery. This is hugely important. These images are crucial to understanding what these things are. So we've got a small group, incidentally representing a complete spectrum of religious affiliation. We have Catholics, Orthodox, Anglican, Muslim, nothing in particular, and a Methodist. So we've got a complete range right across. And I think, again, that is as it should be. Because if these little books are relevant to Christian origins, and I think they are, then it's important that we involve all people who are going to have a particular interest in them. So I look forward very much to working with that panel. I know them all very well, have done for many years, and I know they're fine scholars and lovely people. So I don't think we shall have any friction with the panel.
The politician in me is appalled by what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, and looking through the destruction of all civilizations, artifacts. So I suppose it's natural that one should rejoice in the discovery of new artifacts, especially new artifacts which may or may not, I will have to wait as will everyone else, the findings of the panel tell us something about the Jerusalem church, about the foundations of Christianity, about what was happening in the first century. Bizarrely, conducting this work, Margaret's right to stress the slowness and the gradualness of the work. We're conducting it at a time of accelerated disaster for Christian churches, at least for artifacts of all religions. We have deliberately steered away from talking about what they might be. I hope to live long enough to understand them. I'm going to ask Richard just to say a few words in your turn.
Yes, so this tent is part of a whole project for bringing new life out of debris. And this whole site was reduced to a pile of rubble by a terrorist bomb, and new life has been conjured out of something which did look pretty desperate. The stained glass window to which Tony referred is made out of fragments of what was shattered, and then we, with the assistance of a Muslim benefactor, we created this tent out of goat's hair and Gore-Tex. It is the only Bedouin tent in the world with stained glass windows. We have to take our... I didn't know we were coming in here. So, in fact, exactly the same thing has happened to me this afternoon as happened to me when I was asked by some Shiites in Brent to address their young people in the mosque. And as an mark of respect, I removed my shoes and found that I had a very substantial hole in my sock, which does deflate your spiritual authority. But as Tom said, I mean, the story, much of today, is of debris, of destruction, and today we've heard of the foundation of a research centre which is working very carefully with the wreckage of the past to try and understand more profoundly the way in which religious traditions have been formed. And it's a very humble beginning, and I think that's absolutely appropriate. I was in Jordan myself a fortnight ago, and I visited the site of the baptism of Jesus Christ in Bethany beyond Jordan, and one thing that I'd never really hauled in before, it is the lowest place on earth, 1,300 feet below sea level. And that strikes me as a symbol of the right spirit, which Margaret has been describing, the right spirit in which we ought to be approaching this exercise, one of considerable humility, because I think there is academic professionalism we've heard about, but there's also a considerable and very proper humility. Actually, you might think that since I'm a bishop, I'm likely to be prone to credulity. Actually, I have to say that the Church has got a particularly good record in identifying fakes and frauds. In the late 17th century, the Vatican was absolutely clear that the Shroud of Turin was a later artifact and might be very good for exciting passion and devotion, but certainly wasn't to be confused with something that came from the time of Christ. And it was only when scientists got to work with photographic techniques that that very sensible approach got muddied and obscured and all kinds of superstition entered. So the Church has had a very good record in proper analysis and proper caution, because our experience is very long, and we recognise that without the kind of research that we've had described to us, we're not likely to come to any really useful and creative conclusions. And so with enormous excitement at being here at this little dawn, and gratitude to Tom and to Margaret in particular, who was speaking with remarkable chastity and care today, but when you hear her in full flight, she's one of the most gifted teachers of our time. She is an extraordinary, elemental influence, and I simply, in the spirit of humility, the spirit of careful scholarship, I wish this venture well, whatever the conclusions.
Actually, what the form is about.